Welcome. Hi, my name is Nicolay. I'm the design tutor of the New Normal program here at Strelka Institute in Moscow. Hopefully some of you guys saw Benjamin Bratton's webinar last week. He's the education program director. And he gave, I think, quite an interesting and useful overview of the kind of themes and structure of the program. And we thought we may want to do a second one to address maybe some of the more technical and more, maybe some the questions that are related more to the application process and the portfolios. So hopefully I don't see any viewers or questions here, but hopefully you guys can hear me. I wanted to talk a little bit about the admission process at Strelka. I want to talk about the portfolio tips, and I also wanted to take the chance to respond to some of the most popular questions that were asked during this time. So I will do that here. I have a list, and if at any point in time you have any questions on some new questions you want to ask about either the portfolio or the application, or even on the themes and the structure of the program as well, I'm more than happy to address that as well again. Hopefully I won't contradict myself, or I might contradict myself, but hopefully I won't contradict too much what was said last week in terms of concepts and direction. So I'm talking to you from the Zal. It's the main room in which most of the stuff happens here in our program. Now it's quite empty and sad, but it's going to be less empty and hopefully less sad as well in February when the program starts. So I want to start by just giving a little bit of a sense of what the timeline is for the applications, and give you some key dates, not just in terms of, we all know it's kind of, applications are due on November 1st, but there's also a few key dates to keep in mind. So I'll just go through that now. So the deadline for the application is November 1st, inclusive. That means that you can still submit your application on that day. And on November 2nd, you should be getting an email from us about confirming that you've applied, and basically giving you some key information on that as well. If you haven't received an email, that maybe you should just check in with us and see, I applied, I didn't get an email, what's wrong. Then we, in this whole process, and I'll talk a bit more about the portfolio process and the admissions process itself, which is really meant to be not like a job interview, or not like something like you would submit documents to get hired, but really more like a presentation of your own kind of body of work, and how you think it might be related to the concepts here that we were talking within the New Normal. So there's a lot of different ways of doing a portfolio, and there's no real like good or bad way of doing it, and especially since we have such a multidisciplinary team and people who are applying for all sorts of different directions, we really wanted to keep it as broad as possible. And this is why many of the questions that we have been getting are really about like, what is this portfolio, and how should I even begin to structure it? So anyways, I'll come back to that in a little bit after this timeline. But so the idea of, we wanted to make the process as simple as possible, so we divide it into different phases. So as you apply for the program, you'll get this introduction email to confirm that you've applied, and then we'll take a few weeks. So we'll take from November 2nd to November 23rd, more or less. We'll take the time to review your portfolio and all of your application in sort of various phases. So in the first phase, myself and Benjamin and the team that we have here, we basically go through all the applications and all the documents that were submitted from everyone from all over the world. And we try to basically, without saying yes, no, maybe just having a sense of the range of work and the range of profiles that have submitted some work. And we will go about it in terms of dividing people into different, basically trying to look at all the architects at once, trying to look at all journalists at once, and so forth, in two phases. On the first phase, we'll just get a sense of what they submitted, and on the second phase, we'll try to curate or limit or make a selection for people that we can actually want to talk to. So we'll have an interview process with everyone, and by November 23rd, you should hear back from us in terms of whether you've been kind of selected to take part in the interview process, which is the third phase of the admission process. And by that time, I think usually we have around, depending on the year, we have around 300 to 500 applications. So we are trying to limit that number a bit so we can talk to around 100 to 120 people, more or less, during the interview phase. So the role of, I guess my role and the role of the team that we have here is we're trying to assist as much as possible the process of the education that we are developing here at Strelka. So I'm sure, like I said, even if you've missed Benjamin's webinar, Benjamin and Strelka has put forward this program and this process, but Strelka has existed for quite some time before the program. And over the years, we developed this methodology to basically come up or make sure that the projects that come out of Strelka keep a certain standard and a certain aesthetic, let's say, value, or the goal of our team here is really to support Benjamin in the various range of different experts that do come in and do teach the workshops. So we'll be pretty much, given the fact that Benjamin is here once in the beginning of the program, once in the middle, and once in the end, we'll have different faculty that come in, and we are trying to basically create a sense of continuity in the program so that we can help whoever's here delivering a lecture, but also talk to you and assist you in the projects throughout the whole duration of the program. For this reason, we have a small team here of tutors. Most of the tutors are also alumni from previous years. And these are the people who will be conducting the interviews with you along with Benjamin. So at the end of this kind of third phase, which will end at the end of November, we would have spoken, or you would have spoken to at least one person from our team, or probably two even. Sometimes we conduct more than one interview, in order to basically get a sense of your profile and get a sense of whether we. It's not that. The truth is we get so many quality applications and so many interesting applicants that we're really trying to think of the class itself as one group, as one consistent group that has its own kind of character, its own culture, its own skills, its own kind of interests. So it's really difficult to basically we get many answers, when we get many questions about whether someone is right or not for the program, or whether they should apply. We really make our decision based on the pool of applicants that we have each year. So for this reason, I want to stress out that even if you've applied in the past at Strelka, or you've been on the waiting list previously, I think everyone should still apply again, because the class composition and themes that we explore each year are quite different and diverse. So it's not like we pick the same type of person every year, and just because you haven't been accepted before, you shouldn't reapply. So basically, we'll use the whole month of November to interview all the applicants in these kind of 3 different phases. And by December 1st, we finish the process of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And by let's say the end of the last week of December, we will actually send out the offers to the 30 candidates that we've selected. And hopefully they accept. And hopefully we start the formal administrative process by December 10th. So sorry for this kind of dry, maybe a rundown. I just wanted to get that out of the way so we can talk about the more interesting questions that you've all been submitting throughout, which is the main question of the portfolio and the admission process. So I guess if you're an architect, if you're a designer, you're not it's not a very controversial thing to submit a portfolio. But I think that many people from various backgrounds have very different ideas of what the portfolio means and what the portfolio should include. So I wanted to give a few short kind of tips to everybody, coming from the perspective as well of someone who has been also a student here a few years ago at Strelka, just to give a sense of what we are thinking about when we're thinking about a portfolio, and how you should conceive of this project, not so much as basically showing off your technical skills as you would in a different setting, but really trying to design it and kind of organize this document in a way that are representative of what you think you can bring to the program. So I'll go through a few quick points, and then I'll jump into the questions. And I already see that we do have some questions, so it's nice to keep this sort of dialogue. As you can imagine, it's quite strange to be talking to yourself in front of the screen like this in an empty room. But I'll go through these points. So one of the questions that we received before this webinar was that, and I'll read, if you don't have a design background, so sorry, I'm gonna go back to, okay, so the point is that if you don't have a design background, we really urge you not to try to be a graphic designer. Basically, the portfolios that I think are the most successful are the ones that are as clear as possible and don't try to experiment with funky. Again, if you're a graphic designer or the aesthetic of a project is particular and you think that visually it should be conveyed in a particular way, by all means do so. But especially if you don't come from a sort of design background, please communicate your projects as clearly and as legibly as possible without trying to decorate your portfolio. And I say this also, and hopefully extending it to some of the designers and the architects themselves who are submitting some work, because sometimes the best way to communicate the project is really by keeping it as simple as possible. And it is really helpful for us to not try to be wowed by the let's say exploded axonometric complexity that you're trying to show, but really understand the point of and what you were thinking about when you were doing this project. So when in doubt, keep the graphic design layout as minimal as possible. It really does go a long way in sort of communicating the clarity. Another key point that we've, and I think we shared those a few weeks ago, but I'll still repeat these kind of tips, is to keep it short and to the point. So like I think we have a requirement to have about 10 pages PDF, maybe 10 to 12 pages PDF. It's really critical to try to synthesize the essence of what you are showing. And I know this is difficult because especially if you've come from a journalist background or from a more written, from a humanities background as well, like some of the work that you'll be wanting to show is quite dense. And we did have some people who literally send their PhD theses, and the fact that it's probably a good guess that we won't have the time to read a 40-page thesis on your particular work. So keeping the essence, keeping an abstract, making sure to communicate really strategically. Like the portfolio should be seen in this context within Strelka as really like the first strategic exercise in order to be able to stand out and also kind of get the point across of what you think is relevant in terms of skill set in order to take part in the cohort. So in that sense, keeping the projects to the minimum and explaining how they relate and how they matter in the application itself is the priority. If you're an architect, for example, and you've worked for a firm for like 10 years and you have a whole range of different projects, different towers, to send a portfolio of 10 pages with 10 different towers you've done might not be the best move, because it probably in one page you can explain that you have experience in designing towers and show a few key points and maybe the most notable projects, but you can use the real estate of the rest of the 9 pages in probably more productive terms. So I think this is something to keep in mind as well. It's something that's quite different from traditional kind of artist and designer portfolios who are really trying to show as much as possible. I think keeping it short is actually to your advantage, because we end up focusing as well a lot on your admission, on your application form, which I think is equally important. And we do spend a lot of attention reading what you're sending, going over the links that you share with us, and so forth. Another general tip would be to basically be specific in your kind of personal contribution in the project. Sometimes we have people who work in really interesting firms, but what they did on a particular project is actually really important. Even I would stress that even if a project was never completed or never built, it does help if you do communicate what exactly was your role, and if something didn't happen the way that you wanted it to happen because you were an intern or because you were somewhere in a different position, still showing what might have happened and what could have happened is also interesting. So there's a kind of interesting blend between the portfolio being both a range of stuff that has manifested, but also the failed projects or the project that could have had an alternative future, an alternative version based on the level of thinking that maybe didn't find its way at the end, but is interesting, is also quite useful for us. So don't think that just because something wasn't a success story, it should not be included in a portfolio. On the contrary, I think it really adds, it is interesting for us to see. don't be afraid to include projects and initiatives that are not directly linked to the conceptual topics that we're discussing as well. I think one of the purposes of our program is really to grow, to direct the research, but also to kind of grow it beyond our own kind of sometimes even echo chamber at this point, given the fact that this program has existed for 2 years. So we're not, how to say this, like it's not a church of, it's not the church of the stack. It's not the shrine of Benjamin Bratton, and he'll be the first to say it as well. Like it's important to bring a perspective that you think is seemingly not directly linked to the projects and to the body of work that we were already kind of showing, and the work of the faculty itself. So usually everyone is trying to acknowledge that they know the body of research and that they're interested in and kind of contributing to it, and this is really important. But some kind of left of field projects that have seemingly nothing to do with what we're doing are actually really, really welcome, and would be really helpful to illustrate again your particular contribution, your personal particular contribution to this program. So please do that. And finally, I wanted to say that I kind of said this already, but repeating it, the portfolio is really like a strategic device to communicate to an audience. Like it's not, don't assume our attention. Like you can imagine that we're reviewing around 300, 400, 500 portfolios. Finding a way to connect is important. Sometimes people try to do the whole design thing, hello, my name is, and try to hold your hand through the thing. I definitely don't think that this is the only way of doing it. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's not the best way of doing it. If you think of your portfolio as just like a conversation, which maybe opens up the avenue towards linking, let's say, getting our interest into a particular project, which is then explained further down the line on a website, for example, you could think of your portfolio as 10 pages that are trying to simply synthesize and connect with us, and then the deeper details of the projects exist somewhere else, like online. And we've had some successful portfolios that basically send us 10-page PDF with a brief description and a link that goes back to a website that they specifically designed for this application. Don't feel like you have to do this, but it does help to think of it as a kind of a multimedia thing, simply because this is the nature of most of the work that we do here at Strelka. We don't, the projects themselves, and if you look at the final projects from even years before the new normal, they are trying to exist in a kind of a multiplicity of formats where it's about an idea, it's about a concept, but then that concept has to be communicated to various audiences and at various, attention spans and time spans, and to think strategically, okay, what is the attention span that's required in a review session when someone is looking at 500 portfolios. Sometimes it's good to keep it short and expand it to, if they are interested in this, then they could look at a different channel. So be creative again in terms of this kind of, how does your personal website, how does the existing publications that you've done outside of your portfolio, how do they link back into your portfolio? And that is really, really helpful for us in terms of really getting a sense of how you think about media. Our Strelka, after all, is a school for architecture, media, and design, and we try to take these three things all as one thing. Right, so that's in terms of kind of tips from us. I also want to say a few words about the video, the kind of the 1 minute, 2 minute video that we kind of tested, prototyped here this year, because it does seem to be getting a lot of questions as well. Strelka as an academic institution is quite unique in a sense that we're not really kind of bound by any types of standards or when I say standards, government accreditation standards. So we have the freedom to experiment and to try different things. And this is why we always try to innovate and see different things and how they work in the admission process. So this year we tried this video format, which really should not be seen at all as an interview. You shouldn't don't be afraid that you're saying the wrong thing, or we really want to keep this as light and stress-free as possible for you. I know that it's difficult sometimes. I mean, I don't know how, yeah, I mean, it's not always as straightforward as it sounds, but think of it really as almost like an introduction, like a very candid and relaxed. We're interested in basically, we're curious of seeing how you heard about Strelka, how you heard about the new normal, and really give us a short intro of who you are, just to give us a sense of your communication and really like your English skills. We're not going to comb through what you said and sort of make a judgment based on what was said in this 1 minute. So really don't be too stressed about it. I'm just kind of responding in real time to some of the questions that you're posting about this video. But don't worry, I'll return to all of them from the beginning, but I just see now there's a question about what are the technical expectations of the introduction video. This could literally be like you in front of your iPhone, kind of, or other device of your choosing, to say a few quick words about yourself. Don't make it scripted. You can if you want, but again, we're not going to take these into consideration. This is usually the last thing that we look at. So in terms of order, we really try to focus primarily on the admission form, on the application form, and kind of get a sense of your reaction to our questions. And again, not in the sense that there's a good or a bad question. You're basically shortlisted or blacklisted, but the admission form is usually the best way, I think, of assessing whether the candidate is interested to speak to you. So then we look at the portfolio, and finally we'll look at the proper this video, just to give us a sense of your communication skills in terms of language, not in terms of how smart you sound in front of the camera, because yeah, that's not always a good indication. Right, so that's about the video. If there's many more questions, I'll address them in the kind of a Q&A here. I'll start by answering some of the questions that we've received before this, and then I'll go through this live chat, which is getting quite populated. So a few general questions that we received before. Will the portfolio be printed or reviewed on an electronic device, or projected on a projector, or will seen on a mobile phone? We don't print the portfolios. We'll review all of the portfolios in digital form on a computer. We have a kind of a shared drive where the different people from our jury can sort of take a look and comment. So some of them may print it, but I think just expect them to be viewed on an electronic screen. Therefore, when you think of format, obviously I guess this question is hinting at that, think of the landscape format, which is usually preferred to kind of see something on the screen. Is it possible to add an image of a project as a cover title page and not count it as a project? So we say 10 pages. If you submit 11 pages or 12 pages, I don't think anyone's gonna die. But we do encourage people to stick to that. Please don't send us like 90-page PDF documents simply because it wouldn't be fair, and we probably might not consider it if it's really outside of these requirements. If some projects, or if you want to treat the cover page as something special, like a summary page, like a table of contents, like a illustrated CV, that's also fine. I mean, if it goes beyond the 10 projects, that's totally acceptable. We're not. That's fine. Right. Should the content page contain my CV and skills, or just an index? Really, there's no. Once again, this is really a document that you should treat a bit like almost like a first strategic design exercise. Like, what would be the most useful? If for you've worked on one project for 10 years, but you've done different things on the project, then the cover page will not be a table of contents, but maybe just simply a timeline of everything that you've done on this particular project. On the other hand, if you're really a creative, eclectic artist, you may treat it like as some sort of a diagram or a map of everything that's in different media that you've worked in. Please don't. We don't want to set requirements, because oftentimes what we imagine is helpful, sometimes we can't even conceive of before we see it. So it's better for you to kind of come up with your own format and treat this really as a representation of how you think even about this admission process. Is there a recommended DPI quantity or any other editorial feature that you should consider? In terms of DPI, please don't crash our laptops. I think if you go 150 to 300, that would be the ideal format for this. I'm an architect, and although 90% of my production are architectural projects, I'm also an editor.
Is it possible to add in replacement to an architectural project, an editorial one, expressed in terms of its architectural properties? Yes, please, especially if you're an architect, or especially if you've worked in one medium, or you have one particular kind of professional domain that you are essentially trying to basically expand or move away from, or basically reinvent, which is a core purpose of being a student at Strelka. Yes, don't stick to the format that you think should be the format that should represent what your profession is. I mean, right now we're talking a lot about, basically, we have architects, we have designers, we have programmers, we have journalists. Once you're in the program, really the distinction is really non-existent. It doesn't really, you won't be referred to as that architect or that editor. It's not like you have to stick to this. Of course, we value the skill set and it's important, but your portfolio does not simply have to basically play to that trope. So that's hopefully that answers. As I am a journalist, I'm a bit unclear about how the portfolio should work in my case. Should I include work in the original language, or should I make translations into English and then send the original as PDF as well, just so you see them in your official layouts? Yes, everything that you do send, we ask you to send it in English in terms of portfolio, even though obviously our program is quite international, and half of our cohort is always Russian. All of the admission process is happening in English. So if you're sending written work, we will only look at it if it's in English. You could obviously send a link to it, or an additional kind of maybe page at the end that shows the print screen of its original layout. But if you are sending some work, please send it in English. Okay, a question here from another journalist. How does the abstract give you relevant information of my journalistic work beyond you can surmise from the lead and the headline? Should I just write about the topic I talked about, sources and concluded, or should I go beyond this? I think that when you summarize a written piece, obviously that there's often an argument, there's some sources. I think of the portfolio as a page which basically says what was done, but more importantly, like why it was done, who, even if you spoke to these sources, why did you choose the sources? I would treat it a bit as a kind of, again, almost like a slide to explain to us what was the purpose and what was kind of the framing of that article. And then if you include a link or kind of a reference to that article, then we can basically contextualize it. Obviously, because a large proportion of the people who are applying are coming from this type of background, we do read a lot of the material that is being sent to us, but I think it's really a form of also strategic, but also it will be very empathetic of you to basically try to explain to us the key points that we should be looking at in this particular piece that you're reading, because it also will be to your advantage to frame it as such. So when you think of an abstract, we're not referring to some sort of like fixed definition of what that may be. I think you should really take the freedom that you think is required in order to communicate what you wanted to communicate. I think I've probably pretty much said one thing in various different ways. But yes, long story short, think of the portfolio as something that should help us understand what you would be able to bring to the table, but don't treat it as a kind of some sort of religious document that has to basically tick any boxes. Because our admission criteria are quite, of course, we have a structure here. We compare applicants who have similar profiles quite fairly, but it's also quite intuitive, and it's also quite based on the person itself who's submitting. So the portfolio and the admission form are really a device for us to be able to talk to you in this kind of format through the interview. So we won't take any decisions based on the portfolio or on the admissions form only. It's all about getting to a chance to get to know you and get to see why do you think this is interesting, and also how would you be able to work with other people who may find different things interesting than the ones that you do. So with that, I'll move into the kind of questions here that we have on the YouTube chat. So Gregory, most of Strelka projects are on the crossroads of philosophy, economy, management, and in broad terms AI. What is the purpose of the architect? I think it's a very good question, even beyond this. What is the purpose of the architect? So In our program, like I mentioned, we are one of the core purposes, and this is something that Benjamin was also kind of going into last week, is that we're really trying to kind of prototype new types of urban design practices. And one of the arguments is that the urbanism and the design profession itself is not the exclusive domain of one discipline, but is really up for grabs and up for reinvention. And in the people who are defining these new professions and who are defining the new entry points into urbanism, obviously architects have a key role to play, given the fact that presumably we're better trained or we have a better foundation for this reinvention. So within the program, the architect is really someone who is seen as a good kind of let's say as a connective tissue, as someone who is able to work with different people and who has the communication skills to find the value that could emerge from different skill sets and different disciplines and apply it to the projects that we're doing. I'm sure you've seen all the projects online. In some architectural schools, it will be difficult to argue that these are architectural projects, but we do see them as very much architectural and urban projects. And the type of architects that we're kind of looking for are the ones who are sort of implicitly aware of the skills that they can bring to the table, which extend past simply kind of the built pavilion-like, building-like, master plan-like formats. So the purpose of the architect in this case would be to try to connect and find ways to integrate the other disciplines within the key question. So not at all in terms of like they're the lead of the project, because the projects themselves change quite rapidly, and you'll see that depending on the module or even during the final projects, the people who lead the process are different people at each point, which is really what is desired. We want different people to lead the group at different times because their skill set is obviously valued. But the architect, I think, is a key component to being able to work with different disciplines. And okay, and how did you find yourself at Strelka as an architect? I think Strelka in general, in previous years, Strelka has been reinventing itself a lot since the beginning, and this is very much part of its DNA. It's set up in this way on purpose to have kind of these short, cyclical, intense areas of focus that kind of look at different things and look at the things that are relevant at this particular point in time. So as you may have seen or heard about Strelka from before, given that we started very strongly with an agenda and a way of thinking that was framed by Rem Koolhaas and OMA, AMO, I think that most architects were probably aware of Strelka from this angle. This is very much how I was made aware of Strelka in probably 2000, 2001. When they were showing these kind of paradoxical diagrams, which I think are still somewhere online on the website, but definitely they've been shared widely in terms of understanding the urban reality, not as something that needs to be, not as in you're offering a solution to a particular problem. That's definitely one of the ways, but it's not the only way. Another way of seeing it is basically through the resolution of tensions that are coming through different paradoxes, which are kind of mapped once against the other. And I think for architects it's quite interesting, and AMO and REM were quite instrumental at setting the different way of thinking at Strelka quite early. So I would probably say this is the reason. Has Strelka accepted a single black or brown person as student in its history, and why? Why we have accepted, or why we have accepted, but does diversity mean, what does diversity mean for Strelka? And are they planning to expand the scope of LGBT, black, and other minorities? So in two parts. Yes, Strelka has accepted obviously people from a wide range of different backgrounds every year. I would say that when we are doing the selection process, we don't break it down in terms of geography or skin color, as in this question. We're really trying to break it down in terms of basically sets of very in general terms, like sets of expertise. So we're grouping all the architects in one place, we're grouping all the media artists, we're grouping the software developers, and so forth. And from there on, we try to basically select people and find a way to compose a cohort which is quite diverse, both in its professional backgrounds, but also in its cultural backgrounds. I mean,
Yes, are there any plans to expand the scope of other minorities? I mean, obviously, we want to expand the amount of voices to this conversation, and we want to expand the perspectives that are on the table. But I don't think, if this is a question that's related to kind of the U.S. Kind of thing that's happening right now in terms of quotas, we don't have any quotas, or we don't have any kind of formal structures to basically give preferential treatment one way or the other to applicants from a particular background. We do like, we have a sincere desire to expand the perspectives in the conversation. And for this reason, I think we're trying to expand every year the amount of experts that come to speak into the program, the amount of faculty, and obviously the students should follow and will follow. Hello. Is there any reservation of seats on the basis of geography, nationality? So everything that I said just now, I think, relates to that. The only thing that we do have as a kind of rule of thumb is that we want really to connect to the local context in which we're working in, which is Moscow and Russia. So we try to make sure that the group is 50% Russian and CIS country from that background, and only half of the group is international, just to make sure that the voices are kept and the people who come with interesting perspectives are also aware that they're stepping in a very particular culture, in a very particular context, and that the local, I mean, I say local, but Russia is quite a big country. The Russian perspective is also one that we do want to integrate in every project. And all the projects that we do deliver are all situated within the Russian context. So this is the only kind of requirement and reservation. We try to reserve half of the cohort for Russian and CIS background. So the way that the breakdown usually works, and again, this is a rule of thumb, it's not exactly 50-50 or it depends on the year, but we have 15 people from an urban background, 15 from a different background, 15 people from Russia in a local kind of context, 15 people internationally, and almost exactly 15 guys, 15 girls, so that we have basically a good range of entry points into this. Would you recommend including one's CV in their portfolio? It depends what you mean by CV. I think it's in the admission form. We do ask for your employment, the studios where you worked and the places you've studied. If you're including it as part of your portfolio, I think it would be useful to think of it a bit like a condensed, maybe structuring device to basically try to communicate. If you have projects in different ranges of disciplines, then you can use your CV to basically organize the portfolio as such. I wouldn't recommend putting a CV, like a traditional CV in the portfolio, just because I think it's not the best use of the 10 pages that you have. So don't feel like you have to include it. I love the program, but at the same time, I'm concerned by the visit to Fukushima. Don't you think it might be dangerous for the health of the students going there, as it is still a radiation zone? Yes, I think it may be dangerous, but I actually don't think that this would be the way to frame it. I think, especially if you talk about radiation, flying above that part of the world is probably much more dangerous than being on site itself. I can guarantee that we're not going to go out of our way to make it more dangerous. Obviously, it's going to be very. I wouldn't be worried. Let's say, just long story short, I wouldn't be concerned about the fact that we're going to be somehow affected by the radiation. We're going to do everything in terms of. I mean, we're not going to sneak into the site, right? We're going to go through the proper channels. So hopefully, if it's safe enough to go, we will go where it's safe enough to go. We're not going to jump over any fences, even though Liam is part of our faculty, but we try to keep him in check, him and his habits in check. Would an online portfolio help? As I mentioned, you could think of the portfolio as this kind of offline-online format. In the past, many people have, like I said, submitted a short 10-version page of their portfolio and kind of connected it back to a longer portfolio or longer website that exists somewhere elsewhere. this is totally acceptable, and actually I think it's a helpful way of talking about the main projects that you think are worth talking about. Something else that I would saying about this is that even just the selection of projects that you do put in the portfolio is helpful for us to understand exactly how you think about the program, how you think about these questions. Yes, the online offline strategy is a good one if you are trying to basically put to the forefront the main projects that you think are relevant, and that is in itself maybe a statement. Hi. Can photographs that explore urban design and illustrate some of the written material in the portfolio be included in the portfolio? Yes. Short answer is yes. I can't think why they wouldn't be. I think probably they're encouraged. Hi, I would like to ask if it's possible to submit a recommendation letter from a workshop curator if I consider it more relevant to the new normal than a recommendation for my job. Yes, thinking of the recommendation letter, as long as it's not like from your mom who loves you very much. I think whoever is the most relevant person for the new normal is the one you should prioritize. It should give us a sense. It should give us basically help us understand someone how you work or how you think from someone that you've worked with or collaborated with from before. So if it's more relevant to speak to a workshop leader or a former professor or even someone else, it could be more useful than simply having your boss write one of those generic reference letters that no one really wants to read. Yeah. Have you accepted studio artists that are not designers per se, but whose work deals with the conceptual topics covered at Strelka? Yes, we do, of course, encourage. I think artists are really an important part of this conversation. I think that some artists have a really interesting way of approaching design work, which is actually often much more interesting than how designers approach it. So yes, we have accepted some, and we will continue to accept artists at Strelka. That being said, the program itself is not an art residency, right? This is something that also Benjamin, I think, was trying to communicate last time, is that as an artist, you bring in a different a way of thinking about a particular topic, and then that way of thinking is really, really key in order to frame the conversation. But it's not in the traditional sense of how artists sometimes see collaboration, which is basically they have a master idea and they don't know how to code, and therefore they need a coder to implement their idea. This is not the type of kind of setup that we see for the program. And so sometimes artists who, for one reason or another, think of it more as a artist residency, where they come with a proper project and they're trying to sell their project and find collaborators to work on their project. This is not the kind of artist artist application that we would sort of encourage. If you're an artist, I think even as you frame your portfolio and you frame your application, I think it'd be really important to basically communicate that beyond your particular level of inquiry and your particular scope, there's also kind of a way in for maybe different types of people that you would love to collaborate from an ideation point of view, from a conceptual point of view, much more than simply looking at it from a point of view which would require technical assistance. So yes, we have accepted and we want artists, but we also want the right artists in a particular mindset in terms of how you engage collaborative work, which is, there's no right or wrong way, but the projects that we do here are really inherently collaborative. And that means that the ideas often come from different people, not just the people who we traditionally think of as the artists. Let me see. Just trying to. I already answered the question about the technical, the technical expectation of the introduction videos. I already answered that. That's keep it as easy for you. So I just got a note from my colleagues at the other room about Japan, just so I can give a bit more clarity on the Japan trip. So is it okay if I just? Okay. The Japan government says that visiting Fukushima is fine, and the no entry zone is actually quite a limited portion of it. So I'm just trying to add some clarifications to the question earlier, which I think I was surprised a bit and caught off guard maybe. So this is a bit a better way of answering. The no entry zone is actually quite small. It's only 3%. So we will really visit the really wide areas that are escaping that are not in the targeted zone. So even though it's kind of, maybe some of you and maybe some of us had this romantic notion that we're going to enter with these kind of full body suits, we're going to visit areas that are actually quite safe. So fear not, I guess, is really the point of this note. Right. Should the video include only talking to the camera or also some screened material? Like I said, don't treat this video as a pitch. Treat this video simply as an introduction. So it's, again, from personal live experience right now, it's quite awkward to speak to yourself alone in front of something, but this is kind of the format. It's very much as natural as it's humanly possible. Something that it should not be seen as something with very high production, stressful production value, but really something that is very kind of informal and just is an entry point into getting the conversation started. So no need to basically go into After Effects. Is it fine to have translation of university diplomas just certified by a translating company? To be honest, as the tutor, I don't know if maybe best to double check with our team here, just so I don't want to give any wrong information. But Victoria, we'll try to we'll follow up with maybe I'll address it later if I get the proper answer. If not, hopefully we can communicate by email on this particular point. The next question is similar. Have people without industry, focus. Okay, so people from other industries or more business focused applied in the past, and is it helpful to focus portfolios on products or the business modeling strategy angle? Yes, people from this type of kind of entrepreneurial background have applied in the past. They have. We've had some pretty interesting people from that background in the program itself. So yes, I recommend applying. Focusing the portfolio on the strategy angle is always a good idea, simply because it shows kind of the kind of a broader, big picture way of thinking about the particular project, other than simply like, here's this app that we did and here's this particular product. So yes, I think we do encourage everyone, people from a more kind of let's say, not just from an academic background, people who have experience in other settings. And I think that, yeah, very much encouraged to apply if you manage to find a way to talk about the projects, which does make them sound interesting to the key questions that we're trying to address, right? I mentioned earlier that Strelka wasn't like artist residency. It's also not per se like an incubator where we're really focused on the kind of delivering products or companies. But that perspective is definitely very much part of the way that cities are being shaped, and very much welcome in our think tank. Right. Can one skip the trip to Fukushima, or is it a compulsory component? Yeah, I guess you could skip the trip to Fukushima. I would think, I mean, maybe going back to something to that, well, it's yes and no. Let me put it this way. The way that the program is structured in itself, it's only a 5 month, it's only like a 22 or 23 week program. And we really try to design it as one kind of continuous, intense process. So in the first third of the program, we have what we call basically the theoretical foundation, or the kind of rapid fire speculative design charrettes, where we put the researchers in small teams of 3, teams of 2, teams of 5, teams of 4, depending on the project. We keep changing these teams. And then we try to basically develop a very large body of work of ideas that we don't have to be very emotionally attached to. We can simply like try something out and throw it out of the way and see what sticks, really. In the second part of the program, we move beyond these kind of fast-paced 3-day charrettes to something which is much more kind of research-based, slightly longer-term projects. So this is where the first field trip, the Russian field trip, is going to happen. where we're going to travel as a group with Liam, and it's often a workshop which is related somehow to cinema or filmmaking. So that's kind of the first week-long or 2-week-long project. And then we do a series of other types of different projects as these that we call studios, where our faculty sometimes also kind of checks in and basically leads a workshop, which is slightly more long-term than 2-day kind of ideas. And at the end of this second third is also where we have a sense pretty much everyone has worked with everyone else in the group already, because we change the team so often. And then we try to create the final groups that are the groups that will work on the final project that you do see on the website, which is really the product of 7 really intense weeks of design push. And what we do is we create the final teams right before the field trip. We create them right before we go as a group to travel on this international field trip, which is this year Fukushima. And then because the field trip itself is a research trip, is also not tied to a particular project, it's much more of a time for exploration, a time for thinking as you're traveling as a group, kind of getting to know each other a bit better, getting a sense of what ideas kind of in the first 2/3 made sense, what you would actually be interested in working on. So these trips are also a very important kind of social component in the program. So in that sense, it's actually quite important, I think, for the process that that the full team travels. So in the past, actually, we've never had anyone skip this trip. We have one student, unfortunately, who couldn't make the trip in the first year to California because he didn't get the visa. But yes, ideally, it would be good for everyone to join this trip. That being said, we're not going to sort of force everyone to do it. Okay, in terms of sort of a very live process of question and answer, the Russian language diploma is fine for that question that was here a bit earlier, but other languages need to be translated in English. Certified translations are not necessarily like required, so it's not necessary that you get it certified. But if it's in Russian, you can also submit it. But hopefully that takes care of that question. Is the recommendation letter required on a letterhead? Will email PDF from the person work? Yes, I think that as long as I mean we trust you, so I think it should be fine. I have missed the webinar last week. Is all the information that Bratton has mentioned on the website? Yes, all the information is on the website in much more sort of kind of probably structured and organized way than the ones that we're kind of delivering. But you can also see the webinar. I think it's the video itself is recorded and is somewhere online, I believe. So you can maybe afterwards we could probably share the link on the Facebook page to that webinar from last week if it's not already there. In regards to the interview process, are shortlisted candidates provided with a guide prior to the interview with regards to the structure? Yes, that's a very good question, and I probably, yes. So the way that we imagined this interview process is really not like, we don't want to have it, we wanted to have it as stress-free and as stress-free for you and useful for us. And for this reason, actually, we send you like a form, or we send you some key kind of sample questions that we will be asking you. We won't ask, it's not a shopping list of everything that you need to answer before the interview, but all the shortlisted candidates that will be interviewed, when we do send the details, you receive a PDF form with just the questions that we will be asking, so you can take some time to think it through and basically have an informed answer. We don't want to like put people on the spot. We may ask some questions on the spot, but these questions will be probably informed by the conversation that we're having during the interview. But there won't be any like trick questions that we want to assess how good you are on the spot on this particular point. Especially if the questions have to do with content, we will make sure that you get the questions ahead of time so that you can actually prepare them and we can have a more productive exchange. So hopefully that will take care of some of the stress from the interview, which honestly should not be seen as a stressful thing. It's much more of an informal chat.
Sorry. I'm getting like live notes like in the 50s. This just in. Higher education, exceptions possible. We do require the English proficiency certificate, with some exceptions, which are sorry. It's required with some exceptions, which are mentioned in the frequently asked questions on the website. So again, these are quite in terms of kind of the more admin side of things. If you have any similar questions as well, it's good to just send us an email, and we'll try to communicate that as clearly as possible. But this is why, as the tutor, sometimes I need these kind of cheat sheets to help me with the more admin side of things. Hi, do I need to have a completed? Oh, that was the last question. Right. Good. Well, that's the questions that I see on my screen here. I could continue to talk to myself in front of here, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to jump in. I wonder what while you're typing these, just to reiterate that the structure of the program is kind of it's a framework. Everything at Strelka really functions as a framework that is quite flexible and quite kind of fast changing. So the program itself is 22 weeks, and we do have this kind of informal way of organizing it, but there's no kind of set. There is a schedule, but we keep supplementing that with the particular speakers and particular interventions from people that become relevant as the program progresses. So we're quite quick to adapt, but it's also the negative side of this is actually the schedule itself is never fully locked before the sort of the Thursday or Friday of the week before. So it's a quite fast changing environment, and for this reason we are. And we try to be really, really transparent with this fact that it's very much a full-time program. So it's quite difficult to be able to do more than one thing while doing the program, because most of the weeks are 5 to 6 to sometimes 7 weeks, depending on if we're traveling somewhere. And it's quite difficult to get a sense of the schedule so you can organize your other things that you're supposed to be doing during the time. So while we have this opportunity to talk here, I just want to emphasize again that because this is quite a competitive program, and because the program is not only free, but you get a stipend, we really do hope that you can commit 100% of your kind of intellectual energy to the questions that we're sort of dealing with together. And therefore, it's almost impossible and very highly discouraged to be doing anything else in terms of other, paid work or other work on the side. Right. Is Skype the only medium used for the interview? If you come from a place where Skype is banned, I think, is that the answer for this? If you are from a country like where the video calling is banned, we will have to quite precise. We will figure it out. Yes, pretty much. That's the short answer. We will figure it out. We'll try to arrange a video call ad hoc and try to set an individual call arrangement from in some other medium. So basically, don't worry if Skype is banned. We'll find a way. Don't you have something like group workshop as part of the interview process? That's a very good question, and it's quite good that you reminded me, because I forgot to go into the detail of this as I should have. So coming back to this, to the process of admissions, we have, like, as I mentioned, an international side of the cohort and a Russian side of the cohort. The international people, we don't expect them to come to Russia in person for them to interview. This is why we have this sole setup of doing the remote calls and find ways to do them when they're impossible. But for the international applicants and those who are based in Russia, we have an ambition workshop, which is it's an event that's happening one day during the weekend on which date is it? On December 7th, on December 1st. Apologies, on December 1st. And that event is one where everyone who's local, quote unquote,
comes in person. We have just like an introduction exercise, which really is not part of the interview. It's more like for us to kind of break the ice and getting to know each other. It's usually led not by the interviewers, but it's led by former alumni, so you can get to basically ask questions and kind of get familiarize yourself with the kind of the day-to-day and what it means to be a Strelka student. And we also do these interviews in person. So while you're here during this one-day event, there's a kind of a schedule, and then people do the interviews while they're here. If you're not based in Russia, we don't expect you to come to this kind of a group workshop. It's something that is much more used to basically getting people to talk to alumni and kind of talk to us and see the premises and see what Strelka is like. And the bulk of the admission process happens during the interview. And it simply means that if you're based locally, you will do the interview with us in person. Right. For the portfolio and trying to explain who we are, should we focus more on hard skills or over soft skills? I think it's a range of both. I think it's really important for us to get a sense, and it's also good for you to be honest. Don't lie and say that you can do everything and have all these. If you have some real proficiency in a technical skill, please make that apparent to us. You can maybe use a 1 page or 2 page. If you don't want to focus in terms of project, but in terms of skill, you can also do that. But soft skills are usually quite apparent in your communication and in your admission form, and also in the projects themselves. So in terms of the portfolio, the ability to produce is really something that we'll be able to assess through the quality of the project that you're showing. And the other skills themselves, I think, we'll find ways they'll come to the foreground without you necessarily having to spell them out for us. I think don't feel like you have to basically go out of your way to explain to us a particular soft skill that you may have. If you can explain it through a particular project, this is always preferred, and also it's going to be probably better explained as well. How much of the program implementation is informed about our previous education and contributions versus what is being taught by Strelka? That's a good question. Strelka is a postgraduate program. Obviously, it's when we conceived of the new normal program, we didn't mean it as a kind of a replacement for formal education. It's much more of a way to channel your particular skills and to find new areas of involvement for your particular profile, as opposed to basically trying to erase everything that you've learned in the past, because this is year 0. So we have people who have a very wide range of kind of educational experience. Some people have, PhDs. Some people have just completed their masters or have worked for a few years and have been out of academia for a while. I think these are all valid ways to enter into the program. What Strelka really teaches you, I think, is not like, when I say we have methodology, it's not so much methodology that we're trying to basically indoctrinate you and kind of teach you a way of. It's much more of creating the environment for the really interesting and very intelligent faculty and researchers that we already have here, and the students themselves, to being able to do the most out of this existing skill set that is already here. So what Strelka provides is really like a platform for finding different ways of creating different setups, or even inviting different people at the table to harness a particular skill set that was kind of underutilized, or maybe kind of dormant, or maybe you had it and you always had it and you always informally used it, but never actually understood it as part of your kind of official kind of urban design repertoire. So in that sense, this is kind of the methodology here at play. I think hopefully that answers the question, but if I was too vague, please let me know and I'll try to kind of reformulate my thoughts. Hi, could you please say what the approximate amount of the stipend is? So the stipend is 39,200 rubles. That's around $600 US per month, which is not, it's enough to cover rent, and it's usually enough to cover for your drinks at the bar a little bit, but it's not, I don't know if yeah, it is what it is. It's $600 US. Hopefully that, Is it all right to have a couple images per project that work like an introduction and then embed the link? Yes. For this question, yes, but don't try to basically impress us just by imagery. I think it's important to have beautiful images of the project and obviously embed a link that can show more. But I think that having a very clear what, when, where, why, and I mean, I say this, but in whatever format you think that makes sense, is really important for us to get a sense of the project much more than simply like beautiful imagery. So again, think of the portfolio and think of the project presentation as one where we're going to see a lot of really good projects, a lot of interesting projects. What really matters is to think of like what do these projects communicate about your way of thinking about a particular mode of design practice or a particular challenge or a particular way of approaching a brief. These are the interesting questions for us, much more than was completed, and this is the beautiful award that we got. Of course, you can include that as well, but try to, as I keep sort of saying in different ways over and over, to treat the portfolio a bit like a stand-in, as if it's a conversation piece. It's for us to basically be able to react. It's not a one-way communication device for you to wow us. It's much more to engage us into thinking and to basically getting excited. To actually getting to meet the real you during the interview phase. Is it okay to include student projects to a portfolio? Yes, yes. I think it's quite encouraged to include. Don't. I mean, ideally, it's not only student projects. It's not all student projects, but sometimes student projects have showcase some. A way of thinking which is unfortunately not privileged in some more kind of practical settings. So if you have a project where you think is really key in explaining to us how a particular skill set or way of thinking could be embedded in the new normal think tank, we really do encourage you to add all projects that you've done that are relevant to this. So even if it's refute submissions or failed competition entries, it's a very, I mean, we mean, like, we use the word portfolio because we're still kind of from the architectural kind of design kind of lingering habit, but really it really is just a document to showcase a range of projects that engage in conversation. So hopefully that's not too vague and answered your question. Right, still waiting on, maybe have some more. We can also talk a little bit more about the content if you're curious, or we can stick to this. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting that I should be mentioning? Maybe I can talk briefly, because we already talked about the structure of the projects and the structure of the program. Just again to go back to this kind of master diagram or master's timeline. So the program is divided into these kind of three thirds. The final one is the one where you work on the final projects. Each project gets a budget, so it's usually going to be in teams of 4, more or less. We will kind of create the teams, and obviously not. We're not going to put. We're going to create the teams that we think are the teams that could arrive to really interesting outputs, and then they'll be given a budget that they can basically manage and put to use in whatever form. And given the fact this is the 3rd year of the program, we're also going to try to be aware throughout the process of the type of work that was conducted in the previous 2 years, but not in a kind of not in a religious kind of form, as I was already mentioning. Like in the submission, in the application form, and in all of our communications, I think it's really useful for all the applicants to review all the work that's already come out of the first 2 years of the program. But that being said, we're only using these projects to refer to ideas that the projects are great and they exist in their own way outside of the program. But within the program, there are simply exemplar pieces to talk about a particular idea. And these ideas we, as much as possible, want to build on top of, as opposed to kind of reinventing the wheel. So one advice I could have for people who are preparing for the final form and getting ready to submit everything is just to get a good sense of the work that was already completed by the students, to get a good sense of the work of the faculty, but also not be too emotionally attached to the stuff that we've already covered. Because again, we don't mean to treat these projects as like this is what we're the solution towards what we're working towards. These projects are exemplary of ideas and of like I mentioned earlier, the widening of formats that a design project can take. And each project as well is not one thing, but it's multiple things at once. So for example, some of the projects, all the projects have a website, which is also kind of paid for by the budget. Some of the projects have a film. That film has a trailer. The project itself has a kind of a white paper format. It has a presentation format. All of these versions are all the project. They're not kind of, there's no hierarchy between like this is the project, these are all basically multiple ways of thinking about the design work and thinking about the project in order to communicate it to different audiences depending on what would be the best entry point and way for them to understand what you're trying to talk about. So with that being said, the looking at the projects from the previous years, it's a really good I think it's a good example of seeing how they all basically live in the same universe, which is the new normal shared universe. But each one of them has basically its own life. That doesn't mean that they don't reinforce each other in kind of complementary ways. And the third way will very much be scripted in a similar way, where we're building on the work, building on the ideas. So it's really important for us to know this work, but it doesn't mean that we'll be repeating the types of projects that you've already seen. In fact, we want to expand the collection. Is it okay if the description of projects in a CV is a bit over than 150 words? It's better to keep it, to be honest, it's better for you to keep it brief and concise and try to connect back outside of it in whatever form if we need to learn more. Just putting yourself in the position of people who are reviewing all these portfolios. The admission process, the first two phases. So in the first phase, we look at all the portfolios first time, just flipping them over and just kind of trying to understand, flipping them over digitally and trying to understand what the kind of range of ideas and applications exist. And then in our second view, we actually try to look at it much more kind of carefully, page by page. We read the text, we read the admission form throughout and try to find like patterns and ways of, making understanding what the candidate is about. So if you keep it short and to the point, you're actually doing a lot of the work that is needed to convey why it matters. And this is also work that even as designers we have to be conscious of. So if you are not very good at editing down your thoughts and making and understanding that not 100% of what each project says is always relevant to every other person in the world, then I think that's a very valuable skill set, and that will come across in your application and in your portfolio if you do try to keep it a bit more concise. So please take that into consideration. Would you say that model making skills are appreciated? Are models usually used within the workshops? Again, a very, very good question. Strelka as a platform is really basically this kind of space and this kind of procedural and financial and whatever infrastructure that's here in place for us to be able to do all this work. We don't have any kind of model making facilities like a traditional architecture school. Like there's no shop. We have a few computers. We have some monitors, but it's not like we have a lab and we have a tool shop that you would be able to utilize in the work itself. So any type of model making that, if you do want to do it, will probably be done by either like renting out. Again, this depends on the final project, of course, but you are kind of optimizing your budget and finding ways to do the models or do some quick studies in the shorter projects. Model making skills are, I guess in life are appreciated, but I don't know if in the program in particular there would be really one in which we focus on. That being said, I think when you say model, you also, maybe you mean it in a broader sense. I don't know if, Joanna, you're an architect, but maybe because I'm an architect, I kind of read the very simple sort of primary meaning of it. Obviously, in the work of Benjamin and in the work that we're doing at Strelka, model making is much more of a conceptual process where you're developing models for understanding what you're doing. And in that sense, if that was the question, unless maybe I've been brainwashed by the normal and I see this definition, yes, model making as a skill, being able to create a predictive, descriptive, and projective models is very, very useful. And again, some people from a background of economics, some people who come from more social science backgrounds are quite versed. Some mathematicians might be versed, and people from we had a really interesting candidate with a physics background last year who was one of the students. And again, their ability to think through models is really, really valued. But physical model making is not a primary concern, at least up to this point. One more question, please, Zed. Okay. Right, so more cheat sheets. Just wanted to say that this and the previous webinar will remain available for watching over and over and over again, if you want, on our YouTube channel. And you should, yeah, this is kind of if we're ending it on this note, also reminding people that the application deadline is by November 1st. So yeah, don't be late, right? On applied.strelka.com. Zed or anyone else who has any questions, please feel free to jump in. I can talk quite a lot, but oh, here it is. Okay. 10 pages is not enough for architectural portfolios. Lol. What if it went over 10 and more like 14 or 16? Not, I'm joking. If it's 14 pages, like I said, it's not. Please do as much as you can to limit yourself to the 10 or 11 or maybe 12 pages that are allowed. Just because if someone else managed to, unless you're the most experienced architect in the world, and you just cannot fit into 10 pages, it may be more a question of like strategically selecting which projects are the ones that really do, strike a chord, and are the ones that are relevant for this particular type of research. At least for me, I think that as someone who's also kind of reviewing the portfolios with our team here, the selection, the strategic selection of what projects to include and what projects to omit is also something that tells me and tells us about your way of approaching the themes that we're selecting. So again, as an architect, when you go apply for a job, you have this big binder and you show your stuff and everyone is very impressed. But this is also not the same format as the one where we're trying to basically find people who could be contributors, intellectual contributors in this think tank structure that we have. So yes, I mean, it's a case-by-case sort of process. But I think if we set the requirement for 10 pages, maybe 11 pages with a cover, we would appreciate if you sort of stick to that as closely as possible. Even though it does feel like it's not enough, I think it's maybe the challenge to make it enough. And if you have 3 projects that are talking about one idea, we could include them on 1 page and then go into 10 pages. I don't see space in the education section of the application form to upload scans of the diplomas. There is an upload document section below, so please take a look. Yes. Is it essential that one's work experience has been in the urban design, architecture-related fields? No, it's not essential. Like I mentioned, we try to frame this cohort and this group to make sure that at least half the group has some experience, has basically expertise and dealing with the urban realm, dealing with issues of scale, dealing with issues of the city. But the question of the city itself is one that includes, multiple voices. And so you don't have to necessarily have had already kind of a formal urban education or formal architectural education for you to be able to contribute meaningfully. Yes, I don't. I would say that we don't think that it's essential. Of course, if you think that you could reinterpret some of your existing experience and kind of frame it under that light. Of course, we encourage you to do so, because it's just thinking about what you've been doing and finding the ways in which it connects to the city is, I think, very important and useful for this process. But it's not essential that your experience already has been in that field. Is there a chance to be accepted if all my projects are based on the work with kids, youth, schools? Yes, I think it's, like I said, it's a case by case, depending on how we frame the group, we frame the cohort. We will try to basically find interesting contributors on that particular team. So yes, I really encourage you to apply, and I think the challenge in your case, and as it is in everyone's case, is just really to make it apparent how you think that your particular perspective and your particular experience is one which would be beneficial for your peers here who are all working on these issues with you together. Can a portfolio be in the form of a website? Yes, it can also be in the form of a website, but I think you need to submit on the form, if I'm not mistaken. I think you need to submit something in that field. So if you want to submit just one page with a link, I guess you can do that. But also keep in mind that we're going to judge it in the same way. Like, we're not going to scroll down and try to, like, if everyone else has 10 pages, we'll look at it in the same type of engagement. We're not going to. I guess you won't have there's no preferential treatment one way or the other. We want to get a good sense of everyone's skill set, and this is why we're also trying to limit the format to a 10-page PDF. If sometimes a website is required in order to go into more depth into the projects, we can do that, but don't think that we will necessarily do that for every link you send. So if you decide to only send one link and it's a website with 1 million tabs and subtabs, don't think that we will actually all. Don't expect that all the reviewers will have the focus to going into everything that you might have wanted to. This is why using this 10-page as a kind of a narrative device to structure your thoughts is probably a better strategy. How do tutors relate to program participants? Are tutors assigned to a particular group? Are they floaters? Do groups ultimately work with one specific tutor as a supervisor as well? This is a very good question, so thank you for asking. So the tutors within the program are, we have sort of 2 to 3 tutors, which will be confirmed. So myself, I'm one of the tutors here as the design tutor for the program, and I'm basically there during the whole duration of the program to work with the students, work with the faculty, and basically take part in the conversation, take part in all of the sessions, and also act as a typical kind of tutor role as in any other design university. We also have another tutor in the program who's a former alumni of the program as well, who graduated from the first year of the program. Her name is Lisa Dorer, and she will also be joining us, I think, pretty much for the most of the program, if not the entirety of the program, while we're in session here. And we also, at times, will have workshop-specific or kind of event-specific tutors who will be kind of, I don't like I hate the word facilitating, but who will somehow help to facilitate the field trips, who will help facilitate a particular technical workshop if they have the particular skill set. And again, we try as much as possible to have those tutors be part of our former alumni, both from Normal and Strelka. So the tutors don't, how do they relate to program participants? Once we're all in this kind of room, all the conversations are very kind of multi-directional, and there's no real, basically, kind of hierarchy structure between participants, tutors, and even faculty in many of the cases, because we're actually dealing with questions that don't always have a clear answer. So it's more like trying to kind of work through together what are we actually trying to do. So they relate as kind of collaborators in this kind of general intellectual agenda, which is the new normal. In particular times, they act like, especially in group projects, kind of a person that you can bounce your ideas from. So basically, they're providing feedback, providing basically like helping you determining the blind spots. Sometimes you think something is super obvious. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's an interesting idea, but there's also something else you can consider. Sometimes they recommend references and other projects you should be looking at. So they really act as this kind of advisory role into the projects themselves. And also, we work with the students individually to basically try to assess, because we do meet almost our first interaction would be probably during the interviews and during the admission process. So we try to basically keep a kind of an individual dialogue going with all the applicants, kind of formally and informally, to get a sense, okay, what are the topics that you actually were interested in pursuing even before you came to Strelka? What kind of ideas you think are meaningful, you want to continue and have more of? Sometimes they recommend us really interesting guest speakers that we should add to the program. So it's really basically like a conversation, and really, because the program is quite intense, we all get to know each other and learn to work with each other quite well. The different tutors have also different perspectives into the program. Like some of us have a more kind of a theoretical entry point, or a more architectural entry point. There's also a local context tutor. So I think you'll see that they have the role as kind of helping ensure the continuity of this kind of 5-month structure, which could be quite daunting if you treat it just as kind of individual things that keep happening in time. Our role with Lisa and with the other tutors is really to make sure that this is seen as one program, and we kind of keep the themes that are relevant. And if a question needs to be asked to kind of focus the discussion with one of the faculty that was not aware of something that happened 2 weeks ago, then it's our job to intervene in this particular way. How will the interviews be conducted? So the interviews basically let me go back to my other here. So as mentioned, on the 2nd of November, we'll confirm that we've received your application. By November 23rd, we'll let you know that you've been kind of shortlisted for the interview, and we'll send you basically all the details of like how to go about it. From the content point of view, we send a list of questions. We'll also basically see what time zone you're from, and trying to basically suggest a time or find a time for us to basically make sure that it works with our our Moscow time zone, and wherever you are. And then I think we already have your Skype contact through the admission form, and we just basically connect at that particular time on Skype, and we have about half an hour to talk together. Usually it's with at least 2 people. So we have various interview groups. We have three groups of interview, which are randomly assigned depending on when you're calling. And then we will try to go about the key questions that we asked you to kind of think about. So again, keep that in mind, that if we send you 5 questions, we have about maybe 20 minutes to go about that and talk about it, because we also want to keep 10 minutes or 5 minutes just for questions that you might have, and as much as possible treat this as a conversation, because it's not so much us interviewing you as it's more like you also interviewing us and seeing if it's like the right fit for you, like as a thinker, as a practitioner, as someone who's grappling with a series of interests and research questions. It's also it's a 2-way conversation. You trying to understand whether this is even something you would want to do. I think we take that seriously, and we want to make sure that we give you as much as possible, like clear information, or see it as also like you're interviewing us. So in that sense, we have half an hour for these interviews, trying to go about the questions in kind of a random order, or we send you 5 questions, we may only ask 1, we may go through 5. We'll see how the conversation progresses, but usually it's quite organic. Yeah, hopefully that answers. Like an urban designer might send you a sketch, can a humanities student send you a proposal? I guess it depends what you mean by proposal. Again, as I keep coming back to this, like portfolio it's quite an open format. So if someone from a humanities background has a particular, even a particular format that myself as an architect I'm not aware of, I'm more than happy to try to understand and wrap my head around it and try to understand it from that perspective. This goes back to my first point earlier. If you don't have a design background or an architecture background or an urban background, please, pretty please, don't try to pretend like you have and present it in a way that you think makes sense to us. If presenting a proposal from a humanities background makes more sense, to you, as long as you should be aware that we may not have the habit of reading it the way that you want us to read it, maybe helping us to understand how we should address the proposal that you're sending, then yes, by all means try to present it in that way. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Hi, Evia. So to what extent should the info and study objectives showed in the online application be linked to material put in the portfolio? Again, really good question. They don't necessarily have to be related. I think don't force them to be related if they don't relate naturally. So the questions that we put forward in the admission form are ones that are kind of, I guess, program specific, but also kind of general questions of like why, what's. I know there's one there about a workshop you would want to, if you were to given the opportunity of teaching a workshop, what kind of workshop would you teach, or even why did you decide to apply to the normal and to Strelka? These are quite personal questions that don't necessarily have to find their way. Like, don't think that just because you're proposing a workshop about on let's say robotics, your portfolio should somehow like relate back and say that show robotics projects only. Of course, it would help if that's what you're proposing, to have at least one project that relate to robotics, but don't think of them as two. They're really two separate documents. That and for some people, obviously, some people communicate better in portfolio form, and sometimes people are actually quite bad at making a portfolio. But we can read into their application form that actually have much more to say, and therefore these two are basically complementary pieces of information, not necessarily one cohesive package. Just while we're on the topic of the admission form versus the portfolio, I think that in general, because some of the questions are quite vague, like for example, why did you choose to apply to Strelka, or what kind of topics you think are important for the city of tomorrow, or stuff like that. I think it's really key to try to give your own spin and try to be like original in your. I mean, when I say try to be yourself, don't try to be original for the sake of being original. But try to think about it carefully in terms of very often there's this kind of it seems like some generic responses keep coming back a lot. Like, I want to reinvent my profession. I want to change people's lives for the better. I mean, of course, I've never met someone who that's not a reason that they want to do something. But it doesn't mean it's like a proper answer to a question that actually requires a little bit of thinking from your end. So my best advice, actually, even how to deal with the admission form, is really to think it through carefully for yourself, even, and try to explain it to yourself as honestly as possible for yourself, without trying to tell us what you think we want to hear. Because quite often that is the case, and in this kind of sea of 300 to 500 applications, you get these kind of waves of answers that are all kind of similar to one another. And it would be much more, it's much more useful for us and for you to take these questions almost like as beginnings, and try to think critically about how would you answer from a personal standpoint, without trying to repeat, quoting, as, Benjamin Bratton or as Keller says. Like, just try answer them from your own perspective, and that will give us enough material to actually be able to go much more in detail during the portfolio phase, during the interview phase, which is really also the purpose of these two documents. We're not going to take a decision on a candidate based on their application form and on their portfolio. So these two documents are really a way into getting a in-person or sort of in-person chat together. But again, this is a really good question, and thank you for that. Right, anything else from other channels? If you have any other questions that you would want to type, and just type yes now, and if you're still typing them or if you're thinking about them, just so we get a clear sense. I think for everything else as well, you can continue to email us at the apply email. One other question that I also hear often is what's the level of personal feedback, and how, like, if I'm not accepted or if I'm on a waiting list, or like how much of this is basically going to be, or even like what are the criteria, how many points did I score, where was I on a waiting list? Just for all of these questions, I would say that it's really difficult to, we don't really have, like I said, because we're not some sort of accredited education institution with all sorts of requirements that we need to kind of put in front of the state. Thankfully, we don't. We try to keep this, again, as this is also a design exercise on Benjamin and ourselves as well, to try to curate a group that we think would be effective in working together as a unit, of 30 people, but also working together as kind of sort of 8 different units of 4 that are able to work together with each other and bounce ideas and also be good team workers. So if you're not accepted, it doesn't mean that we didn't think you were a team worker, or we didn't like your work, or we didn't, or there was something wrong with your application. But the truth is that our program, because we're lucky enough that it's, again, it's free, and therefore it's competitive, and we have really interesting faculty that comes to teach. We could probably make 3 groups of 30 in terms of the quality of applicants that we do get. Like, we don't take the best 30 applicants, and every time it's really a difficult process, especially from December 1st to December 7th, which is basically our final week after we've interviewed everybody, after we've done all the interviews. To try to limit that group to 30 people is a really a challenging and really like painful, honestly. Like, quite honestly, it's really a difficult process, because at least 50 to 60 people will be amazing in this cohort, and we just have to take decisions based on all sorts of different criteria, which is one where we're thinking about the class, the group skill set and composition as the priority. So, for example, if one year we have 5 really, really great filmmakers that are all amazing and all doing really, really interesting different work on the new normal. One of them is working on One Belt One Road. One of them is working on Japan. One of them is working on whatever other topic that we think is incredibly relevant. Unfortunately, we're not going to take 5 international filmmakers in a class of 30 people. So at some point, we will have to make a judgment call with Benjamin and as a group here. That doesn't mean that the other filmmakers would have been great candidates, and also doesn't mean that we always get it right. Like, it's very difficult to know how the group dynamic will be until we actually experience it. But it's quite difficult to give a personalized answer why you're shortlisted and not interviewed, or basically why you're on a waiting list but not. And hopefully that's also, you can understand from your point of view as well, that it's not for lack of. Yeah, it's a decision that we have to make as an institute, I guess. Do we want to have a small unit of 30 people that has the intensity focus on it, or do we want to scale up and have 15 cohorts every year? And I think this is how it is for now, I guess. All right, if there's no any other questions, and my battery is almost at critical red. Thank you again. Thank you so much once again for sort of listening to my monologue for about an hour or so. If there's any other questions that you have and you want us to provide some clarifications, please don't hesitate to write to us on the email on the website. As mentioned already, both webinars, myself and Benjamin's, will be available online, so you can look through them, and if anything was missed, write us a message. And if not, don't forget to submit and apply everything by November 1st inclusive. So November 1st is also fine to submit your material. If you haven't heard back from us on November 2nd, please follow up, because every year it's very, very sad when some people sort of do the whole application but forget to click submit, right? Because I think that it's just automatic, and after November 1st, they'll be all automatically submitted. It's not the case, so make sure you click submit. Make sure you've sent your application. And if you haven't heard back from us on November 2nd, please follow up if you still want to apply and be considered. Am I forgetting anything else? Okay, if that's all, again, thank you so much, and looking forward to speaking to some of you later down the line. Thanks.